Flight attendant insulted Leonardo DiCaprio in first class. What happened next? Shocked everyone. The luxurious hum of a first-class cabin buzzed softly as the golden rays of the setting sun poured through the large oval windows. A select few travelers reclined in oversized leather seats, sipping on premium champagne, while the faint aroma of freshly baked croissants filled the air. This wasn't just any flight. It was the epitome of opulence, reserved for the world's elite. But amidst the calm and exclusivity, an unexpected tension began to brew. Leonardo DiCaprio, one of the world's most celebrated actors, quietly entered the cabin dressed in casual clothes, a simple hoodie, jeans, and worn sneakers. His presence was understated, almost deliberately so, as he moved with humility and chose a window seat in the far corner. Most passengers didn't even notice him, absorbed in their own worlds, but one person couldn't help but notice and judge. A flight attendant, impeccably dressed in her pristine uniform and exuding confidence, surveyed the cabin with the precision of a hawk. To her, every detail mattered: the crispness of the linens, the shine of the silverware, and of course the appearance of the passengers. Her eyes landed on Leonardo, and in an instant, her expression shifted. To her, he didn't belong. With a forced smile that barely masked her disdain, she approached him. Her tone was sweet, yet laced with an undercurrent of sarcasm. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her gaze flickering over his clothes. "Are you sure you're in the right section of the plane?" A few nearby passengers glanced over, intrigued by the interaction. One man even chuckled under his breath. Leonardo's calm demeanor didn't waver. He simply nodded. "Yes, I believe so." But the flight attendant wasn't convinced. "Well," she continued, her voice slightly louder, "we don't typically allow passengers to upgrade without prior approval. Did you book this seat or was it gifted?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The passengers around them leaned in slightly, sensing the drama. The stage was set for what would become a moment no one on that flight would ever forget. Before we delve into the events that left every single passenger in shock, let us know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone underestimated another person? And if you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe. We have many more tales that inspire, surprise, and captivate. Now back to the story. As the plane cruised through the open skies, the atmosphere in first class remained luxurious, yet tinged with an undercurrent of quiet anticipation. Leonardo DiCaprio, despite his fame, continued to draw little attention. To the average eye, he was just another passenger, engrossed in his thoughts. But to the flight attendant, his casual appearance was an affront to the exclusivity of first class, a misstep she was determined to address. She approached Leonardo's seat again, this time with a tighter smile, her posture straightened as if to emphasize her authority. "Sir," she said, leaning in slightly. Her voice dipped in a kind of saccharine sharpness. "I'm sorry, but we have a certain standard here in first class. If you need assistance finding your proper seat, I'd be happy to help." Leonardo looked up, his expression calm and unbothered. "I'm quite comfortable here, thank you," he replied, his tone polite but firm. The nearby passengers began to notice the brewing tension. A woman seated across the aisle nudged her companion, whispering, "Isn't that?" but stopped herself when she caught the flight attendant's glare. The attendant's patience was visibly thinning. "I'll need to check your boarding pass," she said, her words clipped. She extended her hand, expecting compliance. Leonardo, unfazed, reached into his pocket and handed over the ticket. Her eyes darted to the document, and her brow furrowed as she noted the unmistakable confirmation of a paid first-class seat. Still, she wasn't ready to let go of her assumptions. "Well," she said, raising an eyebrow, "I suppose this seat is yours, but just so you're aware, our service here is tailored to guests who appreciate the finer things." Her gaze swept over his clothes as she added, "If you'd prefer, we do have some comfortable seating options in business class." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged amused glances, while others frowned at the blatant rudeness. Leonardo tilted his head slightly, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady, "but I'll stay right here." As she turned to leave, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "You'd think first class would attract people with taste." The words landed like a stone in the silent cabin. Gasps were audible, and all eyes shifted toward Leonardo, waiting for his reaction. But he simply adjusted his seat and gazed out of the window, ignoring the insult entirely. Unbeknownst to her, the drama unfolding had caught the attention of a few high-profile passengers. A businessman with sharp features tapped his assistant, whispering, "That's DiCaprio. What is she doing?" Meanwhile, a younger woman 2 rows ahead typed furiously on her phone, clearly documenting the scene for a future tweet. The flight attendant, however, seemed oblivious to the growing stir her behavior was causing. Instead, she returned to the galley, where she shared her assessment of the intruder with a fellow crew member. "Can you believe that guy?" she said, her voice dripping with derision. "He's got to be a celebrity wannabe. I mean, who shows up to first class dressed like they're headed to a gas station?" Her coworker hesitated, glancing over her shoulder toward the cabin. Are you sure? He seems kind of familiar." The attendant rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. If he's so important, why isn't he wearing something important?" She laughed, confident in her assumptions. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, Leonardo's calm reaction had intrigued the passengers around him. While some quietly debated whether to intervene, others grew visibly uncomfortable. A man seated 2 rows behind leaned forward, whispering to his wife, "Why isn't he saying anything? You'd think someone like him would speak up." His wife shook her head. "Maybe he's waiting for the right moment." And the right moment was indeed on its way, one that would leave everyone aboard utterly speechless. The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, but the atmosphere was charged with an unspoken tension. Leonardo DiCaprio remained composed, seemingly unfazed by the flight attendant's subtle barbs. To an outsider, his calm demeanor might have been mistaken for indifference, but those paying close attention could sense something deeper, an unwavering grace that was about to tip the scales. Moments later, the flight attendant returned with a tray of sparkling beverages, her expression still etched with disdain. She stopped at Leonardo's seat, her smile more forced than ever. "Would you like something to drink, sir?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock politeness. "Perhaps a glass of water?" A chuckle rippled through the nearby seats as a few passengers picked up on the sarcasm. Leonardo looked up, his expression as serene as before. "Actually," he replied, "I'll have a glass of champagne, please." Her brows shot up in surprise. For a moment she seemed caught off guard, but she quickly recovered. "Champagne, of course," she said, her tone tinged with an exaggerated sweetness. "Though I must warn you, it's a vintage bottle. Not everyone appreciates its sophistication." "Then I look forward to it," Leonardo replied smoothly, his eyes meeting hers with quiet confidence. His response, simple yet poised, seemed to throw her off balance. She placed the glass in front of him with a touch more force than necessary. The clink of crystal against the table, drawing the attention of those seated nearby. Across the aisle, a woman discreetly snapped a photo of Leonardo and leaned toward her husband. "I told you it's him," she whispered. "I can't believe she's treating him like this." Back in the galley, the flight attendant vented her frustration to a co-worker. "I don't know who he thinks he is," she hissed, acting all calm like he owns the place. "People like that don't belong in first class. It's embarrassing." Her colleague, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "You know who that is, right?" she asked cautiously. "That's Leonardo DiCaprio." The flight attendant froze, her face blanching as the name registered. "You're joking," she said, laughing nervously. "That can't be. Why would he?" She stopped herself, her voice faltering as doubt crept in. Her coworker shrugged. "I'm pretty sure it's him. I mean, look at how people are reacting out there." Panic began to set in as the flight attendant realized the weight of her actions. But instead of apologizing or attempting to make amends, she decided to double down, convinced that maintaining her superiority was the only way to salvage the situation. Returning to the cabin, she passed by Leonardo's seat again, this time pausing to make an unnecessary comment. "If there's anything else you need, sir, please don't hesitate to ask. Though, I hope the champagne meets your expectations." Her words were meant to provoke, but Leonardo simply nodded in acknowledgement, refusing to rise to her bait. It was then that another passenger, a sharply dressed man with a commanding presence, decided to intervene. Rising from his seat, he approached the flight attendant with an air of authority. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Do you have a moment?" She turned to him, startled. "Yes, of course," she replied, her tone shifting to one of exaggerated politeness. "I couldn't help but notice how you've been treating that gentleman over there," he said, nodding toward Leonardo's seat. "I'm not sure if you're aware, but your behavior has been far from professional." Her eyes darted nervously between the man and Leonardo. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. "I've been providing the same level of service to everyone." The man raised an eyebrow. "Have you?" he asked pointedly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've been going out of your way to be dismissive and condescending. And for what reason? Because of how he's dressed?" The flight attendant's face flushed as she struggled to form a response. Before she could speak, the man continued. "You might want to think twice about how you treat people. You never know who they might be." As he returned to his seat, the cabin erupted into hushed whispers. The flight attendant, now visibly rattled, quickly retreated to the galley. Meanwhile, Leonardo remained seated, his expression unchanged, as if he had anticipated the moment all along. The tipping point came when another flight attendant, clearly more experienced and professional, approached Leonardo's seat with a warm smile. "Mr. DiCaprio," she said softly, "it's an honor to have you on board. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to let us know." The surrounding passengers gasped audibly as the realization sank in. The man the flight attendant had been mocking and belittling was, in fact, the Oscar-winning actor and environmentalist, Leonardo DiCaprio. The ripple of shock spread through the cabin like wildfire. Phones were discreetly pulled out to capture the moment, and whispers turned into murmurs of disbelief. The once dismissive flight attendant stood frozen in the galley, her eyes wide with horror, as the weight of her actions came crashing down. But the most surprising reaction came from Leonardo himself. Instead of gloating or demanding an apology, he simply thanked the kind flight attendant and returned to his book. His grace and humility spoke volumes, leaving everyone around him in awe. The stage was set for an unforgettable twist that would teach a powerful lesson about kindness, humility, and the importance of looking beyond appearances. The cabin was abuzz with whispers, the realization spreading like wildfire. Leonardo DiCaprio, one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, had been quietly enduring the flight attendant's arrogance with a level of grace and humility few could fathom. Passengers leaned toward one another, recounting the details of what they had just witnessed, while others discreetly checked their phones to confirm the identity of the man sitting calmly by the window. In the galley, the offending flight attendant paced nervously. The revelation that she had been rude to Leonardo DiCaprio sent her into a state of frantic denial. "It can't be him," she whispered to herself, wringing her hands. "Why would someone like that dress so casually? He doesn't even look like he belongs in first class." Her colleague, now clearly exasperated, gave her a pointed look. "That's the whole point," she said. "You don't judge people by what they're wearing or how they look. I can't believe you didn't recognize him." The flight attendant's mind raced as she replayed her every interaction with him. The sarcastic remarks, the condescending tone, the blatant dismissal. It was all coming back to her, and the realization was suffocating. But before she could act, another flight attendant approached her. "The captain wants to speak with you," they said curtly. Her stomach dropped. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, Leonardo continued to exude the same calm demeanor, as though oblivious to the commotion around him. In truth, he had noticed every detail. The gasps, the whispers, the darting glances. But he remained focused, his serene expression a quiet testament to his character. Across the aisle, the well-dressed man who had earlier defended Leonardo rose from his seat again. This time he addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying an air of authority, "I think it's worth taking a moment to reflect on what we've just witnessed." The cabin grew silent as all eyes turned toward him. "We live in a world where appearances often dictate how we treat one another," he continued. "But tonight, we've been reminded that true value isn't determined by clothes or demeanor. It's about character. And Mr. DiCaprio here," he gestured toward Leonardo, who looked up briefly and offered a modest smile, "has shown us what it means to rise above." A round of applause erupted, hesitant at first but growing in enthusiasm. Leonardo nodded graciously, but raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm yet commanding. "But the real lesson here isn't about me. It's about how we treat each other, no matter who we are or where we come from." As the applause died down, the captain emerged from the cockpit, his expression a mix of professionalism and subtle amusement. He approached Leonardo with an outstretched hand. "Mr. DiCaprio, it's an honor to have you aboard," he said. "I apologize on behalf of my crew for any discomfort you may have experienced." Leonardo stood and shook the captain's hand. "Thank you, Captain," he replied. "But there's no need to apologize. We all have moments where we act without thinking. What matters is that we learn from them." The flight attendant, who had been watching the scene unfold from the galley, felt her heart sink further with every word. She knew she had to face the consequences of her actions, but the thought terrified her. Still, as the captain glanced in her direction and beckoned her forward, she knew there was no escape. She approached Leonardo with trembling hands, her head bowed in shame. "Mr. DiCaprio," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I owe you a profound apology. I let my assumptions get the better of me, and I treated you in a way that was completely unacceptable. I'm so sorry." Leonardo studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled warmly. "Thank you for your apology," he said. "It takes courage to admit when we've made a mistake. I hope this experience serves as a reminder for all of us to lead with kindness and understanding." Her eyes filled with tears and she nodded. "It will," she promised. "I'll never forget this." But the story didn't end there. As the flight neared its destination, another passenger, a renowned journalist, approached Leonardo. "Mr. DiCaprio," she said, extending her hand, "I just want to thank you for handling this situation with such grace. Would you mind if I wrote about this experience? I think it's a story worth sharing." Leonardo hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "If it helps remind people to treat each other with respect, I'm okay with that," he said. "But please, keep the focus on the lesson, not on me." The journalist nodded, impressed by his humility. "Of course," she said. "Thank you." By the time the plane landed, word of the incident had already begun to spread. Passengers posted their accounts on social media, praising Leonardo's poise and criticizing the flight attendant's behavior. One tweet read, "Leonardo DiCaprio just gave us all a masterclass in grace under pressure. Class act." Another post went viral, featuring a photo of Leonardo smiling in his seat, with the caption, "Never judge a book by its cover, or a man by his hoodie. Leonardo DiCaprio." As the passengers disembarked, the flight attendant approached Leonardo one last time. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for your kindness, but for showing me how important it is to treat everyone with respect. I'll do better from now on." He smiled and nodded. "That's all anyone can ask." As Leonardo walked through the terminal, a small crowd of fans and paparazzi had already gathered, eager to catch a glimpse of the actor. But as always, he moved through them with quiet humility, pausing only to sign a few autographs before disappearing into the night. The lesson he left behind, however, would linger far longer than his presence. On that flight, amidst the luxury and privilege of first class, A simple act of humility had reminded everyone of the power of kindness and the danger of making assumptions. The events of that flight left an indelible mark on everyone involved. As passengers shared their stories online and the incident gained attention, it became clear that this wasn't just about a rude flight attendant or a famous actor. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of kindness, humility, and respect, qualities that transcend fame, wealth, or appearances.